Honestly, if you assume the transition of property and power to King Charles was a simple handover, the events of the past 48 hours change everything. I encourage you to subscribe as we break down exactly what is happening inside the royal family. So here where it gets interesting. The late Queen Elizabeth left behind a very specific set of legally binding instructions regarding her private retreats, and Prince William just executed them to absolute perfection, effectively blocking Queen Camilla's children from claiming permanent residence. To understand how we arrived at this moment, you have to look at the atmosphere inside the estate earlier this week. The house managers were handed an authorized document bearing the king's cipher. It was a directive to prepare an entire wing of the secluded property for extended family occupation. This was not a request for a weekend visit. The instructions mandated the removal of several of the late Queen's personal items, including her historic writing desk, to make way for modernized furniture, fresh linens, and permanent belongings for Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, along with their children. Charles had signed off on this transition in a remarkably quiet manner. Behind the scenes, the king has been seeking a unified, blended family environment. He authorized the preparations late on a Tuesday evening in his private study at Clarence House, believing his authority as monarch superseded any previous property arrangements. He signed the authorization using his standard royal ink, placing his official cipher at the bottom, operating under the assumption that the estate was now entirely his to distribute. But Charles critically misunderstood the legal boundaries his mother had established long before her passing. William found out about this unauthorized occupation not through his father, but through Princess Anne. Anne had visited the estate for a routine inspection of the grounds and discovered the Queen's historical archives and private chambers being dismantled. Anne immediately contacted William. As the Prince of Wales, William's reaction was entirely calculated and devoid of public emotion. He did not rush to the press. He did not initially call his father. Instead, he drove straight to the estate with his wife Catherine. Catherine's presence was vital. Her reaction behind closed doors was one of absolute focus. She walked through the altered corridors, noting every piece of heritage that had been boxed away, and quietly supported William's decision to enact a dormant legal protocol. William summoned the estate security chief and the head of the Royal Legal Trust. Standing in the gravel driveway, looking directly at the security personnel, William produced a red legal folder containing the Queen's final property settlement. Inside that folder was a specific clause written by Queen Elizabeth. It stated that this specific estate was to remain strictly for the use of direct descendants of the bloodline. More importantly, it named William as the absolute protector of this boundary. William ordered the security chief to freeze the estate register immediately. He instructed them to strike the names of Camilla's children and grandchildren from the authorized entry list. He then gave the direct order that if the king's convoy arrived, the gates were to remain shut until William gave clearance. When Charles arrived the following afternoon, his car was halted 20 feet from the entrance. The heavy gates remained sealed. Inside the vehicle, Charles lowered his window, expecting a simple security error. Instead, William stepped out from the stone estate pillar. I want you to imagine the silence of this moment. There were no shouting matches, just the cold reality of constitutional limits. William approached his father's vehicle and presented the original trust document signed by the late Queen. Charles looked at the paperwork. He demanded to know why his wife's family was being turned away from what he considered his property. William was incredibly precise in his response. He explained that Camilla, as queen consort, had full rights to be there, but her descendants did not. William pointed out that Charles had authorized the removal of Elizabeth's artifacts to accommodate outsiders. Charles, trying to maintain his authority, argued that he was trying to build a modern family environment. He admitted he signed the paper to give Camilla a sense of permanent belonging. William did not flinch. He told his father that preserving the crown's heritage was not a choice, but a duty. He handed Charles the inventory of items that Camilla's staff had attempted to box up and remove from the Queen's personal archive. When Charles read the list of his mother's displaced belongings, the reality of the situation settled in. He realized that in his pursuit of domestic harmony, he had authorized the erasure of his mother's sanctuary. The king stood in the driveway holding the evidence of his own miscalculation. Camilla was waiting in a secondary vehicle behind the king. When she realized the gates were not opening, she remained inside her car. The tension was palpable. She knew that William had uncovered the permanent rooms, the luggage, and the quiet attempt to establish a second lineage within the royal walls. William made it explicitly clear that any attempt to override the late queen's trust would result in a formal legal review of all royal properties. Charles, recognizing the absolute firmness in his son's position and the undeniable legality of his mother's will, made his choice. The king did not order the security officers to force the gates. Instead, he accepted the folder from William. Without a word to the secondary vehicle, Charles walked through the pedestrian entrance alone, leaving the unauthorized visitors outside the estate boundaries forever. By nightfall, under William and Catherine's supervision, the Queen's writing desk was returned to its exact original location. The modern furniture brought in by Camilla's staff was placed into storage vehicles and sent back to London. The estate was secured, operating exactly as Elizabeth had mandated. Once inside the stone walls of the estate, Charles walked directly to the blue bedroom. As a silent observer in that corridor, you could see the exact moment the weight of the monarchy pressed down on him. The room was half stripped of his mother's legacy, replaced by the premature arrival of a completely different family. Catherine was already coordinating with Margaret, the longtime estate manager, to ensure every historical artifact was catalogued and returned. Catherine did not speak to Charles immediately. Her silence was a masterclass in professional boundaries, showing her absolute alignment with William without uttering a single reproachful word to the king. But there was another figure moving through the shadows of this transition, and that was Prince Edward. Edward had arrived quietly through a secondary entrance, entirely unnoticed by the security detail at the main gate. Why was Edward there? Because Queen Elizabeth, in her final months, recognized that Charles might struggle to separate his duties as king from his desires as a husband. She had secretly entrusted Edward with the role of guardian of the estate. Edward held the final physical key to the underground archive, where the unalterable trust documents were stored. William had the authority to enforce the boundary, but Edward was the failsafe who held the actual deeds to the property's future. This was the brilliance of the late Queen's strategy. She meticulously divided the power. Charles had the crown, William had the enforcement rights, and Edward held the preservation mandate. None of them could act unilaterally to change the estate's purpose. Down in the chapel's hidden archive, Edward and William met with Sir Alastair Fenwick, the retired royal solicitor who had drafted the original trust. Fenwick laid out the specific clauses that Charles had attempted to bypass with his signature. The document explicitly stated that while the property belonged to the sovereign, its residential rights were locked entirely to the bloodline. Charles could not use his royal prerogative to gift permanent quarters to the Parker Bowles family. The legal phrasing left zero room for interpretation. Back at the main gates, Camilla was left dealing with the logistical fallout of the king's concession. Her security detail was forced to reroute her convoy back to London. There were no arguments with the guards. The directive from the Prince of Wales was absolute. Sources close to Clarence's house indicated that Camilla was intensely professional about the retreat, but the realization was profound. She understood in that driveway that while she had the king's heart, the institution of the monarchy was governed by ironclad contracts that even her husband could not break. Charles spent the evening alone in his mother's study. He sifted through the forged authorization papers that his own staff had drafted. The realization that his pursuit of a blended family had legally encroached on crown heritage was a bitter reality to process. William eventually entered the study. The conversation between father and son was reportedly brief and strictly business. William reiterated that the operational block at the gate was not a personal attack on Camilla, but a strict, necessary defense of the Queen's final legal wishes. Charles asked William for the complete inventory of the trust. He wanted to know exactly which other properties were bound by these specific bloodline clauses. William informed him that the late Queen had secured nearly every private retreat with similar legal frameworks to prevent this exact scenario. The king recognized that his authority was absolute in matters of state, but in matters of private royal inheritance, he was merely a custodian.
He formally rescinded his order for the room modifications and signed a new directive recognizing William's enforcement of the gate register. Princess Anne, who had sparked the entire intervention, remained at the estate overnight. She personally inspected the restored rooms, ensuring that not a single photograph, document, or piece of furniture belonging to her mother was missing. Anne's role in this cannot be understated. She operates as the eyes and ears of the family's historical integrity. When Charles attempted to discuss the matter with Anne the next morning, she simply reminded him that the crown always outlives the individual, and the physical estates must reflect that permanence. Over the next 24 hours, a quiet reshuffling of the royal household staff occurred. The aides who had facilitated the unauthorized moving of the Queen's furniture and drafted the initial extended family use orders were reassigned. The king needed to ensure this administrative overreach would never happen again.
The message sent by William was undeniable. The modern monarchy might adapt its public face, but its private fortresses remain impenetrable. The gates of the estate were fitted with a new digital registry, personally overseen by William's office, ensuring no unauthorized vehicles could ever be logged again. For the viewers trying to piece together the dynamics of the modern royal family, this incident is the ultimate blueprint. It shows precisely where the power lies when the doors are closed and the cameras are turned off. It is a system built on centuries of protocol, not personal preference. William proved he is ready to be king not by wearing a crown, but by enforcing a boundary against the current king. He protected the bloodline's exclusive access flawlessly, keeping the entire confrontation contained within the estate walls, exactly as Queen Elizabeth intended. By Monday morning, the administrative reality of the weekend set in across the royal households. The incident at the gates was never logged in the official court circular, but the legal ripples were immediate. Sir Alastair Fenwick returned to his Cambridge office and formally activated the protective clauses of the trust, legally binding the estate's entry protocols directly to the Prince of Wales's office. The notification to Camilla's children did not come from the king. It came through highly structured, formal correspondence from the legal team at Clarence House. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes were informed that their future access to the sovereign's private retreats would require prior written authorization, subject to absolute approval by the estate's designated protectors. This procedural shift completely removed the personal element from the rejection. It was no longer a question of family dynamics. It was a strict matter of property law. By filtering the access protocols through lawyers and trust documents, William brilliantly insulated the monarchy from claims of personal bias or vendettas. Meanwhile, beneath the estate's private chapel, William and Edward completed the final security lockdown. Edward stood by as the archival boxes, including the crucial Box 12 containing the property deeds and the late Queen's final amendments, were placed back onto the shelves of the steel vault. Edward turned his key, William turned his, and the physical evidence of the Queen's foresight was secured safely in the dark. When Charles finally departed the estate to return to London, his exit was entirely different from his arrival. The king's convoy drove slowly past the gatehouse. He did not ask to review the visitor register. He simply acknowledged the security chief with a nod. He accepted the reality that his mother had successfully legally outmaneuvered him from beyond the grave to protect the institution. This confrontation establishes a very clear precedent for the rest of Charles's reign. Because of what happened at the gates, other massive royal properties are now undergoing quiet, intensive legal audits by William's team. The Prince of Wales is actively ensuring that no other historic royal residence can be quietly transitioned into a blended family asset under the radar. Catherine's role in this ongoing audit process is foundational. She is currently working alongside royal archivists to map the original locations of inherited furniture, artwork, and historical documents across these estates. Her meticulous organizational oversight guarantees that no piece of Windsor history can be moved, replaced, or gifted without triggering an immediate administrative alert. What you are witnessing here is not a family feud. You are watching a highly coordinated constitutional stress test. The late Queen designed a specific legal trap to force William to step up and wield absolute authority while he is still an heir.
She needed to know he could hold the boundary, even when the person standing on the other side of the gate was his own father. William passed the test without hesitation. He effectively neutralized a quiet attempt to dilute the crown's exclusive heritage, and he did it with absolute legal precision. The gates of the estate remain closed today, standing as a physical reminder of the unyielding rules of royal succession and the preservation of the bloodline's assets. Thank you for joining me for this detailed breakdown of the realities operating behind the palace doors. If you want to continue understanding the exact legal mechanisms, the quiet maneuvers, and the absolute truths governing the royal family without any of the usual tabloid noise, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We will keep bringing you the facts exactly as they happen.